We live in a time where personal identity is very important, and it's treated like an ultimate truth, something you uncover deep inside yourself and then present to the world. And it's everywhere: gaming platforms, college or job applications, even registering for a phone app. But what if being asked constantly about your identity gives you a distorted perception of how identity really works? What if actively trying to find your identity and identify yourself is either making you feel immobilized and stuck, or hurling you into a fast-moving identity whirlwind? Today, I'm going to introduce two radically different ways to approach personal identity. One leads to more flexibility, more peace of mind, and a stronger connection to the world around you. And the other? It takes the control out of your hands and leaves you vulnerable because it requires an unsustainable amount of reinforcement. So today we'll learn about a denial-based personal identity, and in tomorrow's video, I'll explain how to develop an acceptance-based personal identity that allows you to express yourself, feel authentic, and stay engaged in the real world. Welcome to the Metaphor of Gender. I'm Sasha, a therapist, and this channel is for curious people who prefer deep thinking over dogma. We explore identity, meaning, and how to live life well. Now let's get into today's discussion of identity. Many people believe that identity is something deep inside of you, waiting to be uncovered, like an ancient artifact hidden beneath the visible outer version of yourself. We can see this in the popularity of personality tests, online mental health quizzes, or checklists about things like neurodivergence. This idea of self-discovery is reinforced by online discourse, influencers, and even social media therapists, all of which suggest that if you look deep enough, you'll find out who you really are. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is novel or entirely new. I'm not trying to go on a young people these days rant. Actually, a little confession, which really demonstrates how old I am, is that when I was younger, I was taking quizzes too, like this, and like this. But it was the original one from the 1990s. The good old days. Anyways, my point is, this is not a new thing, and it can be a lot of fun. These sorts of quizzes and checklists and self-discovery tools tap into our curiosity and our desire for self-knowledge. And remember how here on TMOG, all ideas are allowed, and we look at things from lots of different angles. Yeah, that. My point is, wanting to know more about yourself can be a great thing, so we shouldn't be so quick to poo-poo on it. And this drive to figure out your identity is especially clear in the realm of gender. For example, if a person hears a term having to do with a gender or sexuality identity and then starts doing some research to learn more or to become a good ally, they will often come across things like checklists, Reddit threads, and even lessons in health class that encourage them to look deeper within themselves and discover their authentic gender. Some common suggestions on how you might do this include things like reflecting on it, thinking about it, journaling, drawing, or talking to people with different gender identities. Now, this hypothetical person might be encouraged to check out online narratives written by trans people, and even to try experimenting with things like pronouns, clothing, names, or a different gender presentation. Often the person will find themselves deeply immersed in all things gender after a few weeks or months of following these suggestions. Remember how we discussed in a previous video that identity isn't just something you think about in theory, but something you have to live out. Well, after a person has spent considerable time thinking, immersing, exploring, and imagining, they may want to try living out their new identity in the real world. They might feel like it's time to take a really bold and brave step and bring this identity experiment out into real life with others. Now, this is where those two radically different ways to approach personal identity will come into play. Let's start with the most common way people are constructing their identity. Now, this way tends to cause problems and distress, and it can distort the way you understand yourself. I call this a denial-based personal identity. A denial-based personal identity is built on rejection of reality, on self-deception, and on external validation. Let's look at an example. Let's imagine a hypothetical person. Let's just call him Justin. Now, Justin tells people and tells himself that he's a really laid-back, peaceful, zened-out kind of guy. His Instagram is full of abstract nature photos and posts about social justice and deep quotes that emphasize his identity as this chill dude. But actually, Justin is kind of rude. He's constantly pressuring people to do things they don't want to do, and he absolutely explodes if anyone tries to confront him on some of his aggressive behavior. So, in theory and in some superficial outward appearances, he's just a chill, easygoing person. But in actual reality, Justin is pushy, rigid, and really hard to get along with. So I'd say Justin is in denial about the reality of his interactions and that he's curated an identity that's not based in the truth. A denial-based personal identity. How do we know this? Well, it's because the words he uses to describe himself, things like easygoing, laid back, chill, zen, well, those words actually mean something. And his real-life behavior and attitudes don't reflect that meaning. So a denial-based personal identity, in Justin's case, requires him to keep his head in the sand and only to hang out with people who validate the idea of him as being this totally pleasant, great guy to be around, which of course we know he's not. So even the friends in his life have to lie to stay in his good graces. Okay, are you still with me? How might this denial-based personal identity look in regards to something like gender? Well, earlier we talked about the typical way people begin to explore their gender identity through online research, talking to other people who identify as queer or trans, and trying out different ways of thinking about themselves. Pronouns, names, style, aesthetics, all of that. Well, let's take a look at another hypothetical young person, a young woman named Kayla, who's done this exact kind of exploration about her identity for the last few months. Kayla has now really begun to question whether she's a woman. She's been imagining herself as a guy, drawing herself as a guy, and fantasizing about becoming a guy named Kyle. In the online world, she's almost entirely Kyle, and she really likes it. So this convinces her that she's a boy trapped in a girl's body. Eventually, Kayla starts asking people in her real life to see her as a guy named Kyle too. And she becomes less and less comfortable with the fact that her body is female. Now, if this is a denial-based personal identity, Kayla will find herself trapped in her own perspective. She might say things like, "I'm not Kayla, I'm Kyle, and I need others in my life to agree with me." In the same way that Justin demanded that people around him validate his identity, Kayla also needs people to see her as a man, or she becomes upset, lashes out, or cuts people out of her life. See, Kayla depends on the social reinforcement of other people to keep her Kyle identity going. So Kayla's now in a battle with reality itself. There's no internal stability to Kyle's existence, but Kayla is not able to face this painful truth and has to remain in denial to keep Kyle alive. Now, before you get upset with me here, no, I'm not saying that a trans identity is always a denial-based identity. But what I am saying is that an identity that can only exist because of word games, fantasies, and superficial stuff like clothes and hair is typically not sustainable because it is disconnected from reality. What do I mean by word games? In this example, defining a term and using that same term in the definition. In Kayla's case, a man is anyone who identifies as a man. Because the words Kayla uses actually mean something, words like man, boy, guy, and male. And in this case, again, they don't match up with the reality of who Kayla is. What do I mean by fantasies? Now, Kayla's desire to become a man is very real, and it might be valuable and worth exploring. But a fantasy doesn't just automatically make something literally true. And lastly, what do I mean by superficial things? We all know that clothes and hair are just that, clothes and hair. Anyone can drastically change their look using clothes and hair, but that doesn't metaphysically transform them into a different biological sex. As we saw with Justin, Kayla has constructed an internal identity that is not in line with the truth, with the capital T truth. Now remember, on the metaphor of gender, we acknowledge that some things are tangible, concrete, and real, and biological sex is one of them. So now you might be wondering, okay, if that's the case, how could a person remain in line with capital T truth and still identify as trans? How might someone have an acceptance-based personal identity in the realm of gender? The great news is that it's entirely possible to have an acceptance-based identity that is gender nonconforming and also works for you in the real world. Stay tuned because tomorrow that's what we'll be covering. Make sure you're subscribed and please like this video so that you'll be notified about tomorrow's discussion, and that helps other people find this information too. Okay, that's it for today. Keeping one foot in reality and one in possibility. I'll see you next time. This information is meant for educational purposes only and not as a substitute for mental health services.